And this is a swift little mini session on grant writing and fundraising. So the idea is that this session has actually been condensed from a 5-hour full day session. So it is a swift, mini, kind of breezy one. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please speak up at any time during the session. As I mentioned before, we will be recording it. As I also mentioned, we had a bit of problems. We're having some issues with the internet. So if I, for some reason, disappear, please just give me a couple of minutes and hopefully I should be able to log in again. Okay, so welcome everybody. And again, as I mentioned, and I can hear that someone isn't muted. Just please make sure that you mute yourself, just to avoid the kind of noise in the background, if that's okay. Okay. And as I also mentioned, if anyone has any questions throughout the session, please just speak up at any point. This session is sort of divided into 2 bits. We're going to look a little bit at writing winning grant applications. And after that, we're going to have a look at actual fundraising options. I'm aware of the fact that CRCs are kind of experts in a lot of this. So the idea is not necessarily to tell you something that you don't know, and you might already be aware of this, but it's perhaps to just get you to look at things in a different way, from a slightly different perspective, and maybe encourage you to try the sort of funding options that maybe you haven't tried yet. So writing winning grant applications, like I said before, this is the sort of session that could potentially take up 3 days in its own right, but we are going to breeze through it. And the first important point is that your grant application actually begins well before you ever start writing your grant application. So a successful grant application begins with an organization that has a strong foundation and has processes and procedures that are all in order. So at the moment, in the current competitive landscape that we're all operating in, there is a lot of competition for funding, and funders are far more critical when they're looking at potential applicants. So whereas in the past, you may have been able to get some funding just because you seem to have great spirit, funders nowadays expect you to be running a pretty tight operation. And what that means is you will need to have a strong board with committed, cooperative, and with a range of skills. You will need to have up-to-date policies and procedures that are relevant to what your center does. You will need to have strong financial management systems and neat financial processes, well-trained and supported CRC staff and volunteers, strong and effective center admin, including processes for recording and evaluating, and a clear vision and mission. Now, the clear vision and mission is what would be listed in your actual constitutions. And really, like from our experience, when we think about applications, grant applications that perhaps have not been that strong, the reason why they haven't been that strong can often be traced back to one of these that isn't in order. Either the board doesn't really have that strong of an idea of what they're doing, they don't have clear processes, they don't have suitable financial management systems. So these are all really important, and depending on the grant applications, depending on the grants that you're applying to, you might have to provide proof for these. So it might seem like we're kind of getting sidetracked with things that don't have anything to do with grant applications, but this is really the beginning. Okay, so once you make sure that your CRC has a strong foundation, what else do you need to know? And again, we're looking at this in terms of the sort of information that would be standard for pretty much any grant application out there. So the 4 Ws, these are your story, and this is something that you should be aware of and that will be useful for you regardless of the type of grant that you're applying for. So the first question is, who are you? And that relates to your background, your history, anything that seems relevant to that particular grant application. If you're applying for funding to run a seniors program, then the fact that you have delivered those kind of programs in the past is relevant. What do you do? The fact that you are a non-for-profit, the fact that you're at the core of your community, the type of programs that you provide, why do you do it? This is where your kind of philosophy, the fact that you are doing what you are doing as a CRC because you care about your communities, because you want to see stronger, healthier communities, and that's why you do what you do. And who do you do it for? Now, depending on the grant application, this will vary. So it could very well be that you focus on your entire community. And so you say the work that you do is for the entire community of Connemara, for example. Or it could be that you focus on seniors or young people or, the target group of your actual application. So it's important for you to have a clear idea of these 4 points, 4 Ws, before you start writing your application. And again, speaking from experience, a lot of the times, the reason why applications are not successful is because they are messy. The project might be pretty straightforward. The person and the applicant might have a clear idea of what they want to do, but it's a messy application. They don't make it clear who they are, what exactly they do, or why they want to do it. And so having things clear and organized and maybe working on this kind of biography before you do your applications is going to be really useful in the long run, because what you could do then, every time you need a new application, you just pull this information out and adapt it. Okay, so I think this is one of those things that gets forgotten in the sector. We are all really focused on getting money, and sometimes it's easy to forget that we're not beggars. CRCs looking to get funding for a specific project, they are offering a genuine opportunity for a potential funder to give funding to an organization with exceptional strengths that is part of a big network across WA, that has access to population across the states, that has access to regional communities. These are the sort of things that a lot of organizations would pay good money for. So you have got strengths, you've got incredible strengths, and when you are asking for funding, you're not just begging for handouts, you are providing an opportunity to that funder to get involved with you. And I think, again, this is a useful thing to bear in mind. It's a useful thing to think about, and what are your actual strengths? What makes you stand out? Why is your CRC exceptional? And I think let's not forget the fact that you are part of a network. That is a massive, massive strength for you guys. And I think you would do yourself a huge favor to put that in every single grant application. To say that my CRC is actually part of 100 and something strong network of CRCs that represent the entire WA. Because funders love to hear that. And not just that, looking at your own individual strengths in your communities. What makes you stand out as an organization? What do you do really well? What is your proven history of delivering projects or supporting people or, spending money, really, in terms of other grants? And then you want to look at who is your competition. And again, this is important just for you to be aware of. When you are putting in a grant for a specific project, who else in your town could potentially be applying for the same town? And if you can think of somebody just off the top of your head, who is probably going to be applying for the same kind of money, maybe they could be a partner. So it's easier to make someone a partner than to kind of push them off as a competitor. There is enough competition out there as it is. If you can partner up with an organization, that will increase both of your chances to actually get that funding, and it will just reduce the competition, and also it will reduce the duplication of services in your town. So don't be afraid to kind of reach out to people and to say, we're probably both going to be applying for this. Why don't we do it together? And then the other big question is, why you? And again, we're going to be looking at funding options in the second part of this, but that is something that you should be able to articulate regardless of what funding option that you go for. So whether it might be in a grant application or it might be when you're applying for corporate sponsorship, either way, you should be able to sell yourself. That's what that comes down to. Why are you the best person to receive that grant to deliver that particular project? And, you know, the other aspect of this is the reason why you are in the best position to deliver that project is because you know your community. And you should know your community. And if you don't know your community, you should find out who your community is. And again, this positions you as an expert. And it's all about setting you apart from all the other organizations that apply. You want to make it very clear that your CRC is not only experienced in the area, but your CRC has its fingers on the pulse of the community. And so you need to know your community story. You need to know what the social trends are that affect your community, because you will use that to justify why you are applying for that pot of money. So if you're applying for funding for youth programs, for example, are there youth in your community? And because if the actual stats say that youth is really sort of underrepresented in your community, then how do you justify applying for that funding? So how does your community look? Who are they? What do they want? Do a little bit of research. And some of this research is stuff that you guys are doing and kind of day to day without even having to think about it. You're constantly talking with your communities. You're constantly being made aware of the things that matter to them. So note some of these things down and make sure that you articulate them in any grant application. And again, looking still at your community, what are your community's strengths and assets? So it's not just about need. It's not just about what your community doesn't have, but it's about what your community has to offer. It might be that your community is great at volunteering. You know, that your community loves to chip into any events, anything that you're running, that they rock up and are really helpful. That's a massive strength. And that's something to be aware of, and that's something to make potential funders aware of, especially when we then later on get to the budget, because that could be a real significant in-kind contribution. So look towards community for that. But also being aware of what their needs are. And as with the social trends, their needs are going to be, in part, something that you can find out from talking to them, from looking at your community, from being involved in your community, so sort of anecdotal. But it is also something that you could find out by doing a little bit of research, getting some data from your local shire, or, you know, accessing this information on who your population is and therefore what they might need. So a good grant application will have this balance of information. There will be some stats in there, some actual data, some actual research that you've done, but it is also okay to balance that off with your own personal anecdotal experience. So if you have 20 people a day that come to your center and say that their kids don't have anything to do after school, that is information that is legitimate, right? And you should use that information. Any questions at this point? Any observations? Any feelings? No? Okay. We power through. No? Sorry? Is someone speaking to me or not? Okay, sorry guys, I think somebody is not on mute. And I'm not entirely sure who that is. And again, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, please. Okay, so what's your pitch? Again, sorry, just one little admin note. I am going to be muting everybody. I apologize. If you've got a question, either just wave your hand at me or send me a message and I will unmute you. Otherwise, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to unmute everyone and you can all scream at me and, I don't know, either with lots of praise or not so much. So I am just muting now. Okay. So, your pitch. Again, this sounds very formal, and I know that when we think about pitches, we tend to think about them as in pitching to a corporation or pitching to, you know, a sort of big chunk of money corporate investor or something, but that's not necessarily what it is. The idea is, sorry, one second. The idea is you want to be able to pitch yourself in any situation. So it's not just about you pitching yourself when you are given an opportunity to pitch yourself. You know, when someone is saying, all right now, what's your pitch, Kananara? You want to know what your pitch is so that at any given moment, you are able to sell your CRC. And as we all know, it's really about who you know, not what you know. And you will be given many opportunities to speak to people, to speak to corporations, to speak to potential investors or funders. And it's a really small world. So it's not necessarily, this pitch is not about getting them to give you money right then and there. But it's about you being able to articulate the value of your CRC and having that kind of seed planted in their heads. So when they actually get to maybe seeing an application from you, they will recognize and they will remember. But when it comes to pitching in grant applications, this is also really important because this is when all of the sections that we've addressed to this point come into play. So basically, this is what not to do. Yo, people with monies, we're like an organization that totally does stuff, like for people. We are great, trust us on this. We want to do some other stuff for some other people, give us money. And I know that this seems like it might be an exaggeration, but I have literally read applications that are not too far from this. So what went wrong here? And I think we can all spot what went wrong, but the clear things are stuff that we have talked about. So we are an organization. Who are you? What do you do? Who do you do it for? Make that clear so that the person reading your application can understand you as an organization, as a CRC. You do stuff for like people. Who are these people that your CRC serves? Who is your community? What are their needs? Use a bit of information there to back that up. And if you have stats, use that. Paint a picture of your community. We are great. That is a big one. Every organization that will be applying to the same pool of funding as you are will think that they are great. So you need to prove that you are great. And in your pitch, you need to be able to provide that sort of information. So how do you demonstrate that you are great? The easy thing is using outcomes, right? So the easy things to demonstrate how great, for example, Connemara CRC is if TEAC can actually say in their application, through the work that Connemara CRC has done, we have managed to help 80% of the people that participated in our employability program actually get full-time employment. That is something that is clear, that was achieved through a program that Connemara CRC did. And it's not just an opinion. It's not just TEAC saying, yeah, we're awesome. So get used to actually backing up these claims to greatness with actual information. And the information that you use should be relevant to the grant that you're applying for. So obviously, if you're applying for money for a youth program, use successes that you have had working with youth or delivering youth initiatives. And then we want to do some stuff for some other people. What stuff is it that wants to be done? And what project? What does that project look like? Who is the target group? Who are these people that you're looking to serve? Be explicit, be clear, and make sure that your application makes sense and is sort of well organized. And then the final bit, which is give us money. We're going to get to that a little bit later on when we look at funding options, but be sure that the money you are asking for is the money you need. So that involves looking at two things. Number one, do you have the capacity to actually spend the amount of money that you're asking for? So if you're asking for $1 million, think about what that means in terms of delivering a project that is worth $1 million. That is not a project that just one person is going to be delivering. You're going to need quite a few people to be involved in that. Do you have the capacity for that? Does that mean that essentially everyone in your CRC would just be working on this project and all of your other initiatives and service delivery will suffer because of that? So I guess the point is, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't apply for the massive, million grants if you're not sure that you have the capacity to actually deliver on it. And the other point that's related to that is funders do not like to see money returned. So make sure that your budget is accurate and that you're accounting for that expenditure, because if at the end of that project you haven't spent 50% of it, you will have to return it, and that doesn't look good. So that looks like you didn't plan things properly. Okay. So here's another little guide to preparing the pitch. Look at what the problem you're trying to solve and look at the solution. So the problem is depending on the grant. So if you're applying for a grant, again, for a youth program, the problem you're trying to solve is, for example, high youth crime or high youth unemployment in your area. And that will depend on your community. What is the solution? So this is when your program, your CRC, will be providing the solution. The solution is a youth program that combines sort of social interaction with providing practical employability skills, right? That is the solution that you're bringing. Why are you the right people to provide the solution? Because you have a history of delivering these kind of successful programs in your area. And the last program that you delivered won awards. Also, from the last program, like we said, 80% of people managed to get into full-time employment. And how can the funder help you? So this is where absolutely you ask for money, but think of other things that a potential funder can contribute. So do they maybe have skills and expertise? So if you were applying for a grant from a bank, for example, It might be that your grant application is rejected, so you don't get the funding, but you can then go back to them and say, okay, so we didn't get this funding, but what we really would need help with is, I don't know, promotion. Would you be willing to help us promote this amazing project that we're going to get off the ground somehow? So think beyond just money. And this is important in terms of what is your project and how do you demonstrate, how do you get across to a potential funder that this project is worth their investment. So this is a particular area where a lot of small non-for-profits struggle with. So we say here that the project comes before the money. And what we mean when we say that is that you need to be convinced that your project is worthwhile, that there is a need for your project, and that it is in line with your strategic direction as a CRC, right? These are the things you need to be sure of before you start applying for money for it. The way things usually happen is that we see a grant advertised and we go, oh yeah, we'll be able to make something up along those lines and then sort of shoehorn it somewhere along our strategic direction. And that is understandable. You know, we all need more funds, but really in the long run, that is not the most effective way of doing things. And the biggest reason for that is that anything that you do that takes you away from your core mission and your core objective dilutes the actual effectiveness of your initiatives in your community. So if you are in the community to support, I don't know, in Jinjin to support social inclusion and connectiveness in Jinjin, if you are spending a lot of your time delivering the sort of projects that have nothing to do with that core mission, but they bring you in some money, you are diluting the effect that you have. So you need to make sure that your project has a need, has a community need. And why do you need it? Like, how can you prove that there is a community need? And again, this is when we go into the research. You can use statistics to demonstrate it. You can use stats from your local shire or from Australian Bureau of Statistics. There's lots of sources that you can get cold, hard data. But you can also use the sort of community engagement that you run in your community as evidence of that. So you can speak with your community. You can get them to tell you what they need. And that is a really strong foundation for any project, because what that means is if you have involved your community in defining that need and telling you what they want, what's needed, then you are setting yourself up for success. So you are then going to be applying for a project or for funding to run a project that the community already supports. And so when you eventually get to delivering that project, it's not something totally random that nobody has asked for. It's something that you have already a pretty clear sense that there is a need for. So the other point here is have clear outcomes. So what will your project change? And now I'm going to mention this, and we're going to try not to get too distracted, but I think all of you guys are aware of the fact that the DRD in your new contract, so beginning in October, are going to be focusing on outcomes, and you're going to be asked to report on outcomes. So this is important. It's important both in general to make sure you're doing a good job as a CRC, but it's also important for your current contracts with the DRD and the future of that, because the DRD will ask you to start looking at outcomes more actively. So If anyone has any questions about that, please, we can talk after the session. We're running training on this, on outcomes measurement. So there is a lot of support CRCs can get around this area. But in a very small nutshell, outcomes are what your project will change. So that is why this is important. Because when you are looking at the success of a project, or of any initiative that your CRC does, if you are considering outcomes, you are evening out the playing field. Because it doesn't matter if I'm running a project in Perth and someone is running a project in, I don't know, Dalwallinu, right? So Perth has a population of I don't know how many million, Dalwallinu has a population of I don't know how many hundred. If we're looking at bums on seats, I will always win. I will always be at an advantage because I have access to a bigger population. And so when it comes to numbers, it isn't fair to just focus on numbers. And not only isn't it fair, but it doesn't give a clear indication of success. Because I might run a program where I've got 400 people, but they just spend their time on their mobile phones throughout the entire program, and nobody learns anything at all. Whereas TEAC might run a program that has 3 people, but at the end of that program, their lives have been changed. They get full-time employment, they increase their confidence, they improve their social skills, and they manage to actually land jobs. Which program is more successful? The one that had 300 people that learned nothing, or the one that changed something? So the outcome of your project is what you are looking to change. So, for example, reduce social isolation. And actually, the way to frame it is in a positive way. So, increase social cohesion or increase opportunities for employment and for youth. Increase digital literacy. All of these things are outcomes because they are changes that hopefully will result because of your program. And be realistic about it. You can have outcomes in the sort of short, medium, or long term, but when it comes to the outcomes, to the changes that your program will directly contribute to, don't kind of go for world peace. Because not only is that difficult to measure and to achieve, but you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. So be realistic. If you're running a digital literacy course for seniors, then having an outcome increase digital literacy is fair. And hopefully you'll be able to demonstrate that your program has achieved that. Now, what are your objectives? That is, what will you do? What are the actual real outputs and activities that will result because of your program? And these objectives need to work towards achieving your outcome. So if your outcome is to increase digital literacy, then your objectives might be to provide 10 one-on-one support consultations with senior citizens, to run 20 workshops, to provide an information booklet. These are all the objectives of your programs, and they all work towards that bigger outcome of increasing digital literacy. So the other thing to be aware of, and again, this relates to outcomes, is be aware of what your outcomes are as an organization, but also look at the outcomes that the potential funder has. So your potential funder, when you're applying for grants, they will list out what their outcomes are. And if these outcomes take you away from your core mission, from your strategic direction, then it might be a good idea to leave that project, because you always want to be focused on your strategic direction. So keep an eye out for that as well. So this is just a little puzzle sheet on how you would describe that project. In a grant application, what do you include there? So why? What is the project? Why are you delivering this actual project? So the why is, why are you delivering a project increasing digital literacy for seniors? It's because in your community, you know, you've got the stats to demonstrate that there's a high proportion of seniors. They are more isolated than the general population. And also, they've got very low digital literacy, which means that they struggle to do the sort of, online shopping or accessing MyGov or any of the things that have now moved to online. So that is the why. Why now? It's because you know that there is an urgency. So you need to demonstrate that urgency. It might be that there's been a recent sort of spike in the number of people that come to your center and ask, for these kind of programs. Why you? Because you are awesome, you're amazing. Demonstrate that with stats, with information. Offer proof to what you've done. And again, I will mention this one more time because I think some people might not have been around when I first mentioned it. Do not forget to say that you are part of a bigger network. This is seriously one of the biggest kind of weapons that you as a CRC have. It's the fact that you can assure a potential funder that actually when they're investing in you, they're not just investing in a teeny tiny little non-for-profit in the middle of nowhere. They are investing in a massive network that provides access to essentially all of WA. And that is huge. Okay. How will your project make a difference? So this is when you want to look at the reasons why you decided this is a good idea. Your project would make a difference because it will provide access. It will provide information, resources. What are the sort of objectives there? And what? The what is the change. The what is the big change that your project will actually achieve. So that is your outcome. And the benefits, those can relate to your CRC, they can relate to the community, but also they can relate to the actual funder. So look at the benefits in a sort of bigger way than just, and think of the benefits long-term as well, because another thing that funders are super keen on is sustainability. So when you look at the benefits, don't just think of the benefits in terms of for as long as you have the money. Think of the benefits, think what happens after that money has been spent. So what are the sort of things that you are building into this project that will guarantee sustainability? And some obvious ones might be the partnerships that you're developing through the project. Those are partnerships that even when the money runs out, they're going to keep going, and your community will benefit from those partnerships. And the other thing is looking at training, right? The fact that the project will provide an opportunity to train your staff or train your volunteers in whatever it might be. And that kind of increase in skills is something that your CRC and your community will benefit from afterwards, so after the funding has been spent. So this building an accurate budget, again, so this is the sort of thing where I know that a lot of CRCs are really good at this. But there are organizations that do struggle with this, so I think we're going to just go ahead and mention the obvious. And here are some of the obvious points when you're preparing a budget for a grant application. List all project costs under headings. So do not just have project $8 million. Break it up into, wages and fees, and don't forget your own costs, materials, travel, equipment, and training sessions, whatever it is. Break it up into clear headings and list the costs under those headings. And then break down the costs. So, for example, if your facilitator is $3,000, don't just put $3,000, but put down 75 hours at $40 an hour. That's how you arrive at $3,000. get quotes. If you are looking for the actual funder, so if you're looking to, in this grant, to pay for something, so to pay for the facilitator even, or to pay for equipment, or whatever it might be, make sure you get a few quotes. And this is actually really good just for you as well, because by getting a few quotes, you are making sure that you are costing your budget and your project accurately. So there's nothing worse than being given a big chunk of money and realizing that you have actually not costed it accurately. And the real truth is that, I mean, when I managed a community center in London before I came here, and when I first started that job, I genuinely had no idea what I was doing. And the very first grant application that I did, I just guessed what things would cost me. And I got the funding. And when it came to delivering it, it was a real struggle because I had guessed. So help yourself out by making sure that when you are saying that something will cost you a certain amount, you know what that amount is. Include in-kind support or match funding. Again, this is pretty standard now with pretty much any grant application, and they want to see in-kind support and match funding. So match funding is when another agency or organization is matching the amount of dollars that you are asking for. So that is about cold hard cash. So someone else is providing another lump of cash for your project. And in-kind support is essentially anything that will not necessarily be cold hard cash, but nonetheless is being contributed to the project. And it's useful to try to convert it to cash if possible. So if, for example, you put down that to support the project, the CRC manager or admin assistant will be providing X amount of hours in kind. You know what that's worth because you know what you are paying your staff. So you can actually put down that means that we're actually contributing $10,000 to the project in kind. Look at volunteers, look at the venue. So basically, think about this in-kind support in terms of everything that the CRC will be providing and not charging for. You will be providing the venue and not charging for that. You will be marketing and promoting this, which will cost you in terms of flyers, in terms of time. You won't be charging for it. Include that in kind as well. And then include an admin cost, and that will be around 15% of the total budget. It's important to include an admin cost because you will be there are costs of operating a CRC that you won't include here. So they're the sort of general overheads, the internet and having the lights on and having a venue. And it's important that you actually cover some of those costs in each of your grant applications. But also you want to make sure that you make a tiny little bit of profit on top of that so that you are able to use some of this money to pay for, say, the manager to sort of oversee the project or additional support towards the project if it's needed, because you never know, it might cost you more. One note here is do not put your admin cost at like 50% of the budget. It looks really, really bad, and it looks really, really greedy, and it's not justifiable, and it will put funders off. So when you are including that admin cost, be reasonable. You want to make sure you are covering your costs. You want to make sure that you give yourself a little financial buffer, but you don't want to seem greedy. Okay, partnerships. This is really important, and as we said, your potential competitors can actually be your partners. And nowadays, there are few grant applications that don't require you to demonstrate partnerships. So having strong partnerships not only helps you deal with competition, but it also helps you sort of improve your chances of getting a grant. So a strong partnership will be based on similar values and ethos. That means that if you're looking to partner with organizations in your community, it might be worthwhile partnering with organizations that are other non-for-profits, organizations that also are there for the community. So partnering with, I don't know, puppy kickers of Gingin might not be a good alignment, right? So you want to make sure that it's, again, an organization that cares about their community. Partnerships that aren't held back by ego or petty concern do not get sidetracked by that. The moment these sort of personality and disputes start popping up in partnerships, it becomes really difficult to deliver on a project, and it makes everybody look bad. An equal partnership, you want to make sure that there is, each partner is getting something and is giving something, is inspiring, is focused on specific issues and outcomes, and is sustainable. So just in terms of being one step ahead when it comes to grant applications, make sure you have considered how you will evaluate this project. And when we say evaluate the success of the project, we are looking at the outcomes. So how will you demonstrate whether or not you have achieved those outcomes? And if you have achieved those outcomes, then your project can be considered a success. Also, sustainability. What are these things that you have in place to make sure that once the funding runs out, the project doesn't just disappear? And key documents, if you've got any tax concessions, so as a non-for-profit, you will be a tax concession charity. You might have DGR status or something, so make sure you list these tax concessions that you have. Annual report, or if you don't have an annual report, AGM minutes, audited financial statements, and your constitution, of your up-to-date constitution. And you also want to have 2 or 3 friendly referees on standby that, you know, have experience with you delivering projects in the past and can say some nice things about you. We are going to be speeding through this session at net break speed, but again, if anyone has any questions, we can look at that sort of at the end. But fundraising options, generally speaking, we've got 3 main funders in Australia, or in fact in the world. We've got government funding, government funders, and that's at 3 levels, which is federal, state, and local. We've got corporate funders, and that kind of corporate cash tends to come in 2 categories, which is sponsorship or partnership. And we've got philanthropy. And philanthropy, again, falls in 2 categories, and that's trusts and foundations, or general fundraising, which is also philanthropy. So, beginning with government grants, and the 3 tiers, as we mentioned, are federal, state, and local. So, depending on the size of your organization, but considering CRCs, if you are a small CRC operating in a small town, it's always a good idea to begin with local and then go wider. So start with funding that your local government can provide you with, your local shire. Then look at state government and then move out to federal. The responsibilities, so for a federal grant, the responsibilities are pretty onerous. So again, make sure you've got the capacity to deliver on that. So some of the plus for government grants is that they are actually impartial and unbiased. So you are operating on an even playing field. There's going to be no sort of, well, we like you and therefore you'll have an advantage. There's set criteria, which also helps because you know exactly what they're looking for. There's information and guidelines. They're driven by efficiency. And there's transparency of the funds available. So you will know exactly how much money there is usually and how many grants will be provided. And they're pretty easy to research. So one thing which is useful to know about the philosophy of government grants, and this is generally the philosophy about all government operations and expenditure, and it's a utilitarian point of view. So anyone that's studied philosophy will know what we mean by utilitarian, but generally, what that means is that they are looking for the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. So that is what government will be looking at every level, the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. And that is why sometimes it's difficult for a small organization to compete, because a larger organization will be able to demonstrate a benefit to more people. But focusing on outcomes, as we said before, helps you kind of deal with this a bit, because you will then be able to demonstrate that you can have the same benefit, right, even if you are a small organization, because it's not just about numbers, it's the actual change. So some of the challenges with government grants is that the application process is really strict, and having grant applications come in late means that they are just disqualified. There's lots of jargon, and usually in order to be successful, you'll have to have a bit of an awareness of what this jargon means. What do they mean by impact measure? What do they mean by strategic alignment? All of these words, you don't have to fake it. So if you don't know what something means, don't use it. But be sure that you have an understanding of, at the very least, the sort of outcomes that they're looking for. They're inflexible, moving priorities, and this relates to the fact that we've got changing governments. So one government will have one priority and then another one will just shift to that. And they're not convinced by ideals or rhetoric, and this means that however lovely and passionate you are, that is not going to sell your project or get that government grant. You need to rely on data, stats, cold hard information, and cold hard proof. So having an application where you talk about how wonderful your community is and how you really care about them, that's not going to convince government agencies. That's great, that's really good that you're passionate, but what they want is proof. Okay. So when it comes to applying for government grants, always discuss your project with a grant officer. Again, remember that the aim of government grants is to bring the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. Make sure you have read the funding criteria and only apply if your project actually fits that bill. Okay, corporate giving. Now, as I mentioned before, corporate giving falls into two categories. So it's sponsorship and partnership. Now, the triple bottom line, and this is what measures a company's corporate, social, and environmental success. This is a concept that is pretty much standard now in business. So businesses are not just looking at their economic bottom line, they're looking at their triple bottom line, and that means that they're looking at both their economic success, at their environmental and social. And really the sweet spot when you're looking at getting money from corporates is if you can position yourself right there in the middle, where you're actually ticking all three of their these boxes. Either way, you want to make sure that you're at least looking at two. So you want to demonstrate to this corporation that you might help their economic bottom line, and that you can help that by giving them access to a new market, for example, and also their social. So they are doing something good for their community. They're sort of meeting their corporate social responsibilities, which is important. And here is the difference between corporate sponsorship and corporate partnership. So corporate sponsorship is a formal exchange between a business and a non-for-profit or charity, where the business gets exposure in exchange for cash. This is pretty cold. There is no love here. So that is why big corporations tend to only sponsor big non-for-profits that they can guarantee they will get good exposure from. So you must be able to offer good opportunity for positive exposure and access to new markets. And you would be speaking with the marketing department about this. And this is, like I said, an exchange. They are buying exposure from you, essentially. They're giving you cash for exposure. And again, I will mention this one more time, which is that as a lone CRC out there in the woods, you will struggle to get corporate sponsorship. As part of a network, your job is made far easier. So play on that if you're looking towards corporate sponsorship. Corporate partnership, on the other hand, and this is generally favored by larger businesses and actually is better for the smaller, the organizations, the non-for-profit as well, is basically a long-term relationship based on mutual goals and objectives. So you as a non-for-profit have to offer an opportunity for partnership, an opportunity for the business employees to get involved somehow by volunteering, and also you have to be able to tick that social responsibility box, so to make sure that you're doing something good for the community that that corporate organization cares about. And the people you would be speaking to if you're looking for a partnership is the community engagement or development department. And as we said, this is a relationship. This is something that will be building over time. Now, when it comes to securing corporate sponsorship, you want to have a good sponsorship proposal, offer a menu, so you're asking for specific amounts. You want to match your project with the right sponsor, so don't go and ask for money from an organization that does stuff that you really don't approve of, that pollutes the environment if you really care about the environment. Align yourself based on value, research the right person to speak to, and always follow up. When it comes to corporate partnerships, these are some of the things that a corporation will look for when deciding whether or not to partner with a non-for-profit. So these are some of the hints that a non-for-profit is partner ready. And these go all the way back to the very beginning of this presentation when we talked about the foundations that you should have. So strong finances, strong boards, focus on strategic business, invest in measurement and evaluation, and can demonstrate a culture or history of collaboration. So if you are looking to approach a company to become a partner with you, these are some of the things that you should be able to demonstrate. Now, here's the other thing, and that's if you are approaching a corporation, whether it's for partnership or for sponsorship, if they say no to giving you money, don't just stop there. Make it difficult for them to say no to you by saying, okay, so you can't give me cash, that's okay. How about you give me some time? How about we get some of your volunteers, skilled volunteers? Or how about you help promote this project? Or we need some information. Can you help us with that? So, and that's actually a really neat way to start building that relationship that will hopefully become a partnership. So give them a chance to get involved, even if they don't want to just give you money. Give them an opportunity to help you out and to be part of this project that you're looking to deliver. So philanthropy, and this is the final sort of option in terms of these three funding options. This refers to giving by individuals, funds, or companies without the expectation of returns. And one of the things to look at is deductible gift recipients. So philanthropy, and in fact corporate giving as well, will most often require that you have deductive gift recipient status. Now, and because we're kind of running out of time, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but if you are a financial member of LinkWest, you can get access to DGR status through the ANCA Public Fund. So even if you don't have DGR status yourself, by being a member of your local peak, of your state peak body, which is LinkWest, you can actually get access to DGR status. And again, I'm happy to talk about this more with anyone that's interested in this information. And Again, philanthropy, we've got two avenues here. So there's the trusts and foundations, the philanthropic trusts. These are institutions that basically give money on behalf of donors. And the important thing to bear in mind when it comes to trusts and foundations is that they are legally required to fulfill the purpose for which they were established. And this means that if you are looking to apply for, to a trust, a philanthropic trust that deals with youth, and you're applying for a project for old community members, however amazing your project is, they legally cannot give you money. So only approach philanthropic trusts that actually relate to your project. And fundraising, this is basically just getting money from your community or, from people online. And this can include crowdfunding, lotto, raffles. And the one thing to just think about is you may need a license, you may need a fundraising license. And the people to call is the Associations and Charities section of the Department of Commerce. And they will let you know if you actually need a license. When it comes to fundraising, so this is general fundraising, getting money from your community, issue a meaningful challenge. So get people united around a cause, around something that's important to your community. Think outside of the box. So like the ice bucket challenge is a great one. People want to be active. People want to do something. They don't just want to press a button, give money, and then be ignored. Make it fun. Make a fuss. And also make it easy for people to donate. Like, if possible, have a donate here button on your website. Or have a tin or something at your center so that people can do it easily. Crowdfunding. Again, this could be an entire session in itself, but in a nutshell, crowdfunding relies on an organization putting up a campaign on a website. And there are many websites, and these are all crowdfunding websites. They're websites where people with many, many causes essentially sign up. They put up their campaign, they put up their information, pictures, and then they ask people to donate money to that cause. It's a good way of doing community engagement. Some projects are more suitable for this kind of crowdfunding campaign than others. And usually the kind of projects that engage people emotionally. So this is pretty much the polar opposite of government grants, right? Here, you want to pull at people's heartstrings. You want to give people a reason to care and a reason to give you money. If you've decided that you are going to do a crowdfunding campaign, you would then need to decide on the suitable platform for you, and there's many out there. And once you have started a campaign, don't assume that people will find you. Make sure that you're promoting that in your newsletters in your community. Don't be vague. So be very clear, even though this is an emotional thing and you're talking with passion about your cause, you want to be clear about what you are raising money for and why. You are raising money for a playground for the kids. And you have a few pictures of sad-looking kids because they don't have a playground. Don't forget about promotion. Don't ask for $1 million when you only need 1,000. This is important because generally the way crowdfunding works is you will set the amount that you are looking to raise, and you only get that money released if you achieve your target. So if you don't meet your target, you don't get any money at all. So make sure that when you are setting your target, you're setting a realistic target, because if you don't reach it, you will not see that money. And the other thing is, even if you meet that target, the money won't all come in one big chunk because it's dependent on the donors actually making their payments. So the money will trickle in over, a period, which means that you should give yourself at least a month or something until the end of that campaign before you start the project, just to make sure that you've given everybody an opportunity to, pay up. And don't run the campaign for too long or not long enough. The sweet spot is usually between 25 and 35 days. This is If you run it for too long, people get bored. If you don't run it for long enough, it doesn't get a chance to build momentum. And don't forget about DGR status. This is something that can be useful even when you're asking just individuals to donate 20 bucks. And don't forget about the campaign on day 3. What to do with crowdfunding. Put time and effort into planning it. Use photos. Make it look professional. Draw people in, involve people in kind of your passion. Use social media, newsletters, websites, and your contacts. Story, place, innovation, community, and personal. These are the standard things that you are told you should use in a crowdfunding campaign to make it successful. Tell a story, focus people around a place, look at what is innovative about this thing that you're asking money for, sell your community, and make it personal. Get people to personally connect with it. And also let people know that your campaign is running and keep letting them know. So don't just forget, keep reminding people. Offer different levels of buy-in, so between $5 and $50, and reward donors. So if somebody gives $5, maybe send them a thank you note. If somebody gives $50, maybe invite them to the launch event or something. But make sure that people who donate money to you are acknowledged and thanked. Who are you talking to, mate? So this is about knowing your audience, and we've kind of touched on this in various sections, but the important thing here is when you are writing a grant application or putting together a crowdfunding campaign or even giving a pitch to someone, it is important for you to know who you are talking to, because depending on that, you will have to change the tone and the words that you use. So like we said, if you're talking to government officials and department, you want to be cold, official, use the kind of language that they understand, back it up with data, with facts. If you're talking to your community, if you're looking for a crowdfunding campaign and you're speaking to people in your community, it's okay to be warm and fuzzy. You still want to be clear about what you're achieving and what their money will buy, but you don't, stay away from using jargon. Use the kind of language that will get them on your side. You want to win them over emotionally. So knowing who you're speaking to is important because that will help you fine-tune your language. So general tips of advice: start thinking locally, begin locally. Who are people in your local community that you can approach for money? And this can involve both government and also sort of corporation or individuals. Start with the relationships that you have and think about building partnerships. Allow yourself plenty of time. And when in doubt, ask for help. People actually like to be asked for help. That makes them feel involved. And like we said, that's a good way of starting to build a partnership. And keep it clear and concise. Read and stick to instructions, and this applies to everything, government grants, but also things like philanthropic trust or sponsorship packs. And develop a grants calendar. This is a useful little tip. Have a grants calendar of your center where you put all of the grants or even sort of philanthropic opportunities as they come up. And invest in training. It's useful to have someone in your center, even if it's a volunteer or a trainee, who starts really kind of specializing in this and writing grants. And also seek feedback. Always ask for feedback. Even when you're not successful, especially, make sure you find out why your grant hasn't been successful. I'm going to skip these. So these are the most usual reasons why a grant application was rejected. And this is from the actual state and federal governments. But actually, I think it probably relates to grant applications outside of that as well. And the main one is deadline was not met, guidelines were not followed, or the project did not meet selection criteria. The budget was unrealistic or didn't have enough detail. the proposal appears beyond the capacity of the organization. So if you are a small CRC with 2 part-time staff, it's going to be really difficult for you to justify applying for a $1 million grant. And proposal was not sufficiently clear or defined. Proposal did not meet the current requirements. There was a lack of evidence of community need or support, and there was a lack of consultation or partnerships. So you would do yourself a massive favor by just making sure you don't fall in one of these categories. And post-application success. This is great. You're successful, but it doesn't end there. You will have to acquit that application, and so you should think about that acquittal. You know, when you're writing your application, you should already be thinking about the acquittal. So look at what will you need in order to acquit that application. And the thing is, depending on who you're getting your money from, there will be different acquittal processes. So if you are getting your money from the government, you'll have a very formal acquittal template that you will complete, and they will tell you what they need. But even if you're looking for a crowdfunding campaign, there is still a sort of informal acquittal that you will want to provide. And that will involve maybe pictures of the completed project, maybe telling people that have given money, you know, how great it was. Just keeping people involved and up to date, which will help kind of make sure that they're willing to give more money to you later down the track. Okay, so we will move to questions now, and I'm just going to unmute everybody. So, does anyone have any questions? Any comments? There's a deafening silence.
Oh my God. Well, thanks, James.
So, no questions? This is either really great or I've confused everyone. I'm hoping I haven't confused everyone. If you think of any questions about this, then you know where to find me. We are also, as I said, providing a bit of training and information around outcomes. So if you're interested in that, you can also give me a call. And I guess thank you so much, everyone, for joining this session.